The ground doesn't just disappear, except in Florida, where it does exactly that. One minute you're standing on solid earth. The next minute there's a hole the size of a house swallowing everything in sight. Cars, trees, sometimes entire buildings. It's happening faster than anyone predicted. The state just shut down major coastal areas. Not because of a hurricane, not because of flooding, but because the land itself is vanishing. So what's actually going on? Because this isn't just some sinkhole story. This is way bigger. Let's get the headline out of the way first. In the past 6 months, Florida has experienced over 200 documented ground collapse events along its coastal regions. That's not normal. That's not even close to normal. The average year sees maybe 30 to 40 sinkholes statewide. We're talking about a 500% increase concentrated in a specific area. And the scary part, it's accelerating. The Florida Department of Emergency Management issued evacuation orders for portions of the Gulf Coast last month. Not recommendations. Orders. Entire neighborhoods in Pasco County, parts of Hernando County, sections of Pinellas County. We're talking about thousands of people told to leave their homes because the ground underneath them might just decide to stop being ground. Now you're probably thinking sinkholes, right? Florida's famous for them. There's that house in Seffner that got swallowed in 2013. Killed a guy in his bedroom. That sinkhole under the resort near Disney. They happen. This is Florida. But what's happening now is different. This isn't random geological bad luck. This is systematic collapse across hundreds of miles of coastline. And the reason why is going to make you rethink everything you know about Florida's geography. Here's what most people don't understand about Florida. All of it sits on limestone. Not just any limestone, but a specific type called karst limestone. It's porous, full of holes, like Swiss cheese made of rock. Over millions of years, water has been flowing through this limestone, dissolving it, creating underground caverns and aquifers. The Floridan Aquifer, one of the most productive aquifers in the world, sits in this limestone layer. It's what provides drinking water to most of the state. But here's the problem. Limestone dissolves. Slowly, usually, but it dissolves. Acidic water, and all water is slightly acidic, eats away at limestone over time. This has been happening since Florida emerged from the ocean millions of years ago. The state has always had sinkholes. They're part of the landscape. The ground collapses into underground voids, creates a depression or a hole. Nature fills it in eventually. Life goes on, except now it's not going on slowly. It's happening fast, really fast. And the reason is a perfect storm of factors that all decided to hit at once. First, sea level rise. Yeah, climate change, but stick with me because this isn't political. This is just physics. The ocean along Florida's coast has risen about 8 inches in the past century. That might not sound like much, but in coastal geology, 8 inches is massive. That rise means salt water is pushing further inland underground. It's infiltrating the aquifer, mixing with the fresh water. And here's the key part. Salt water is more corrosive to limestone than fresh water. The rate of limestone dissolution near the coast has increased measurably. Studies from the U.S. Geological Survey show that areas that were stable 20 years ago are now experiencing accelerated erosion underground. The limestone is literally dissolving faster because there's more salt water in contact with it. But that's just part one. Florida's population has exploded. In 1950, about 2.7 million people lived in Florida. Today, over 22 million. That's an 8-fold increase in 70 years. All those people need water. They're pulling it from the aquifer. Massive amounts of it. Municipal wells, agricultural irrigation, industrial use. Billions of gallons per day. When you extract that much water from underground, you're creating space. You're lowering the water table. Keeping the limestone stable. Remove that water and the rock above has to support its own weight without that cushion. In areas where the extraction is heavy, the rock is under more stress than it's ever been. Think of it like removing the air from a balloon. The structure collapses inward. That's basically what's happening underground along Florida's coast. The water table has dropped in some areas by 10 to 15 feet in the past 30 years. That's a huge change in a relatively short time, geologically speaking. And here's part 3. The one nobody saw coming. Development weight. Florida has been building like crazy. Shopping centers, roads, parking lots. Every building, every structure adds weight to the ground. That weight gets distributed down into the limestone. The limestone can handle it. But when you combine that weight with increased dissolution from salt water and decreased support from water extraction, you're pushing the system beyond its limits. There's a stretch of coastline in Pasco County where they built a massive mixed-use development 5 years ago. Shopping, housing, entertainment, the whole deal. Beautiful place. Except they built it on top of a limestone layer that was already compromised. The developers did geological surveys, sure, but those surveys look at conditions at that moment. They don't predict how those conditions will change when you add 50,000 tons of concrete and steel. 3 months ago, cracks started appearing in the parking structures. Small ones at first, then bigger, then sections of the parking lot started sinking. Not dramatically, just an inch here, 2 inches there. Did their assessments and realized the problem wasn't the parking lot. The problem was 40 feet underground, where the limestone was collapsing into voids that hadn't been there before. They evacuated the whole complex. Thousands of people displaced. Businesses shut down overnight. And here's the nightmare part. They can't fix it. You can't just pump concrete into the ground and call it good. The voids are too extensive. They're connected to other voids. Start filling one and you might create pressure that causes another collapse somewhere else. It's like trying to fix a termite-infested house by patching one board. The problem is systemic. The state geologists started doing emergency surveys of other coastal areas. What they found terrified them. Ground-penetrating radar showed voids forming under developed areas all along the Gulf Coast. Some of these voids are huge, 20 to 30 feet across, just sitting there waiting to collapse. The problem is, you can't see them from the surface. Everything looks fine until suddenly it doesn't. There's a neighborhood in Hernando County. Nice place. Been there for 30 years. Last month a sinkhole opened up in someone's front yard. Not massive, maybe 15 feet across, 20 feet deep. And when they started surveying the area, they found evidence of subsurface voids under at least 40 other properties in the same neighborhood. They evacuated the entire street. 60 families gone, told they can't come back until further notice. But here's where it gets worse. Insurance doesn't cover this. Homeowners insurance in Florida specifically excludes sinkhole damage unless you pay extra for sinkhole coverage, and most people don't, because it's expensive. Homes they've been paying mortgages on for decades, and insurance isn't going to pay them a dime. They're just stuck with a property they can't live in and can't sell. The real estate market in affected areas has crashed. Who's going to buy a house when the ground underneath might disappear? Property values have dropped 40 to 60% in some areas. People who bought homes 2 years ago, paid full price, are now underwater on their mortgages, even if their actual house is still standing. And the state government is scrambling, because this isn't something you can solve with an executive order. You can't legislate limestone to stop dissolving. They're trying to figure out compensation programs, buyout options. But the scale of the problem is staggering. We're potentially talking about tens of thousands of properties affected, billions of dollars in losses. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, got involved because this qualifies as a disaster. They're doing assessments, trying to map out the most vulnerable areas. But their problem is that ground conditions are changing constantly. An area that looked stable last month might have new voids forming right now. The geology is dynamic, and they're trying to make static maps. It doesn't work. Meanwhile, the infrastructure implications are enormous. Roads are built on the same limestone. In some areas, highways are starting to show signs of subsidence. The pavement develops waves, like rolling hills where it should be flat. That's the ground underneath settling unevenly. The Florida Department of Transportation is inspecting thousands of miles of roadway, trying to identify problem areas before they become dangerous. Route 19, a major highway along the Gulf Coast, that they've reduced to one lane in each direction because the other lanes are sinking. Traffic is a nightmare. But they can't close the road entirely because it's a critical evacuation route. They're in this impossible situation where they need the road to be safe, but they also need it to be open, and those two requirements are increasingly incompatible. Bridges are another concern. Bridges have foundations that go deep into the ground, down to bedrock. But if the bedrock itself is dissolving, if voids are forming around bridge supports, The structural integrity of those bridges comes into question. There are 37 bridges along Florida's Gulf Coast that are now under enhanced monitoring. Engineers are checking them weekly, sometimes daily, looking for any signs of movement or stress. The economic impact is spreading beyond just property values and infrastructure. Tourism is taking a hit. People see news about ground collapsing. They decide maybe Florida isn't the best vacation spot right now. Hotel bookings in affected areas are down 30%. Restaurants are closing because there aren't enough customers. Small businesses that depend on tourism are going under. The environmental impact. When ground collapses, it doesn't just create a hole. It disrupts groundwater flow, damages ecosystems, and can contaminate the aquifer. If a sinkhole opens up near a septic system, that sewage can go straight into the aquifer. If it opens near industrial areas, chemicals can infiltrate the water supply. There have been at least 6 documented cases in the past 4 months where sinkholes have created direct pathways from the surface to the aquifer. That's terrifying, because the Floridan aquifer provides drinking water to millions of people. The state is testing water quality constantly now, looking for contaminants. But it's reactive. They're finding problems after they happen, not before. The scientific community is divided on what happens next. Some geologists think this is a temporary acceleration, that conditions will stabilize as sea levels stabilize, and water extraction gets better managed. Other geologists think this is the new normal, that Florida's coastal areas are entering a period of prolonged instability that could last decades. There's a researcher at the University of South Florida who's been studying this for years. He published a paper last year predicting exactly what's happening now. He warned that the combination of sea level rise, aquifer, depletion, and development weight was creating a critical situation. Nobody paid much attention because his predictions seemed alarmist. Turns out he was understating it. His latest research suggests that up to 15% of Florida's Gulf Coast, that's roughly 150 miles of coastline, is at high risk for accelerated ground collapse over the next 10 years. If he's right, we're looking at a migration crisis. Where do those people go? Florida's population is already concentrated in coastal areas. Moving inland isn't simple when inland is already developed. And here's the thing nobody wants to talk about. This might not be fixable. You can't reverse sea level rise on a state level. You can better manage water extraction, but the demand isn't going away. The population isn't shrinking. You can limit new development, but the existing development isn't going anywhere unless it literally falls into a hole. Some engineers are proposing extreme solutions. Massive grouting operations where they inject material into the limestone to fill voids and stabilize the ground. But the cost would be astronomical, billions of dollars. And it would have to be ongoing. You can't just do it once and be done. The limestone keeps dissolving. You'd have to keep injecting material indefinitely. Other proposals include managed retreat, basically paying people to move away from the most vulnerable areas. But politically, that's nearly impossible. You're asking people to abandon their homes, their communities, their lives. And you're asking the government to fund it when state budgets are already stretched thin. The insurance industry is reevaluating how they operate in Florida. Some companies are pulling out of the state entirely because the risk has become unmanageable. Others are raising premiums to levels that make insurance unaffordable for average homeowners. There's talk of a state-run insurance program, but that just shifts the financial burden to taxpayers. Here's what's happening right now. Today, the state has established exclusion zones around the most vulnerable areas. You can't build there, you can't develop there, and in some cases, you can't even enter without special permission. They're using drones and satellite imagery to monitor ground conditions in real time. When they see signs of imminent collapse, they issue immediate evacuations. Emergency management teams are staged along the coast, ready to respond to collapses when they happen. Because they will happen. It's not if, it's when and where. They've got equipment pre-positioned, rescue teams on standby. Except you don't know when or where the hurricane will hit. Local governments are struggling with the financial implications. Property tax revenue is dropping as property values decline. But the cost of dealing with the crisis is increasing. Roads need constant repair. Infrastructure needs enhanced monitoring. Emergency services are stretched thin. Some small towns along the coast are facing bankruptcy. They literally don't have the money to deal with this. There's also a social dimension that's getting overlooked. Communities are being torn apart. Families that have lived in the same area for generations are being forced to leave. Schools are closing because enrollment drops when people evacuate. Community centers, all the social infrastructure that makes a place a community, it's disappearing. And the psychological impact on the people living through this is severe. People are sleeping with their phones next to them, ready to evacuate at a moment's notice. Kids are having nightmares about their houses falling into holes. It's traumatic. The media coverage has been sporadic. Big national outlets covered it when the evacuations first started, but now it's mostly local news. The story has fallen out of the national consciousness, even though it's ongoing and getting worse. People in other parts of the country have no idea this is happening. It's become Florida's problem, not America's problem, even though the implications are national. Because here's the thing. This isn't unique to Florida. Parts of Texas, areas of the southeast with limestone bedrock and rising sea levels. What's happening in Florida is a preview of what could happen elsewhere. The conditions that created this crisis exist in other places. They just haven't reached the critical threshold yet. Climate scientists are watching this closely because it's a real-world example of how climate change impacts manifest in unexpected ways. Everyone talks about hurricanes and flooding and heat waves, but ground collapse due to saltwater intrusion into coastal aquifers? That wasn't on most people's radar. Now it's a major crisis affecting hundreds of thousands of people. The political response has been predictably complicated. Some politicians want to downplay it, worried about economic impacts and property values. Others want to declare a full-scale emergency and throw resources at it. But there's no clear solution, so the political will to act decisively isn't there. It's easier to study the problem than to actually solve it. Meanwhile, people are living with this every day. They're adapting as best they can. Some are choosing to stay despite the risks because they have nowhere else to go. Others are leaving, taking losses on their homes, starting over somewhere else. The displacement is happening quietly, family by family. But it adds up. The construction industry has basically halted in affected areas. No bank will finance construction in a high-risk sinkhole zone. No insurance company will underwrite it. Existing projects are being abandoned mid-construction. There's a half-built condo complex in Pinellas County that's just sitting there. Millions of dollars invested, going nowhere because the developer can't get insurance, and buyers won't touch it. Real estate agents in these areas have had to completely change how they operate. Full disclosure is now mandatory. They have to tell buyers about sinkhole risks, about evacuation zones, about the geological instability. Sometimes years. The ones that do sell go for prices that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. And here's the frustrating part. This was predictable. Scientists have been warning about this for decades. The data was there. The research was published. But warnings get ignored when they're inconvenient, when they threaten economic interests, when they require difficult decisions. Now Florida is paying the price for decades of ignoring those warnings. The question now is what happens next? Does Florida find a way to stabilize these areas? Do they accept that some parts of the coast are no longer viable for human habitation? Do other states learn from this and take preventive action? Or do they wait until they're in the same crisis? What's clear is that the Florida coast as we've known it is changing permanently. The ground is literally shifting under one of America's most populated states, and there's no easy fix. The evacuations, the infrastructure failures, the economic collapse in affected areas, this isn't temporary. This is the new reality for coastal Florida. Thanks for watching. If you want to stay updated on how this develops, subscribe and turn on notifications. This story is far from over.